Alrighty guys, here we go for chapter 5, section 1. We're going to look at energy flow in ecosystems. So there's our topic, energy flow in ecosystems, and here's your essential question. How is energy transfer in a food web more complex than energy transfer in a food chain? All right, right off the bat, first key term. Life depends on the sun. Energy from the sun enters an ecosystem. Plants then use that light energy to make sugar molecules. These are carbohydrates, either simple carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates. And this is through the process we know as photosynthesis. Now, in photosynthesis, I'm going to throw the little formula for it up here. This is the process by which plants, algae, some bacteria, a lot of times we just think it's plants, but it's any producer. And some of these are going to be protists, not just in the plant kingdom. But plants, algae, which are protists, some bacteria use sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water to produce carbohydrates. This is sugar. So the very simple thing is if I have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, so that's CO2 and H2O. In the chlorophyll of these organisms, they always have chlorophyll. This is what allows them to do it. It's the magic, if you will, of plant life. It takes 2 abiotic things, combines them, rearranges the molecules into C6, H12O6 with 6 molecules of oxygen left over. So it takes 2 non-living things, reorganizes the molecules, the atoms, into a sugar molecule and leftover oxygen. Now C6H12O6 is just one particular sugar molecule. There are many different types of sugar molecules in protein, etc. But from a simple standpoint, that is how it functions. We're going to look at going all the way from producers, the next key term, into consumers. You and I are consumers. Because plants make their own food, they're called producers. They produce their own food. This is an organism that can make organic molecules, sugar molecules, carbohydrate, proteins, etc., from inorganic molecules. We also refer to these things as autotrophs, self-feeders. Auto for automatic, self, and troph. We will talk about tropic levels, feeding levels a little later on. Anything that's on this bottom of the food chain, it's producing its own food. We can call it a producer. We can call it an autotroph. Basically, same term, meaning the same thing. Now, anything that gets its energy from eating something else is a consumer. This is you or I. Many things must die for you to survive. Let's put it this way. Let's say Mr. Pettit lives on chicken. I don't think eat anything except chicken. Not that this is a good diet, but just to make the point. Well, how many chickens does it take for me to survive a day? So for breakfast, I have a couple of pieces of chicken. For lunch, maybe I have a couple of pieces of chicken. For dinner, I have 2 pieces of chicken. And I have a snack somewhere along the way. Well, there's 2 legs, 2 wings, 2 breasts, 2 thighs. That's it. Takes about a chicken a day. So for me to live a year, 365.4 chickens must die. They say you're a vegetarian. Well, a lot of plants are having to die to support. We're consumers. We must consume something else. So a producer is making its own food. You and I are consumers. We have to get our nutrients by eating something else. We are also called heterotrophs. Hetero meaning different. We are different feeders. We must feed by getting something else. Autotroph, automatic feeder, self-feeder. Heterotroph, different feeder. We must eat different things, or other. Hetero just meaning other or different. So autotroph, heterotroph. Make sure you can identify those terms. Some producers get their energy directly from the sun. They absorb it from their leaves, and then consumers get it indirectly. So they're getting their energy directly from the sun. You and I are getting our energy indirectly. We have to eat something else. So there's a loss along the way. Not all the energy from the first level makes it to the next level. We're looking at this aspect of autotrophs versus heterotrophs. Now, I do want to point out the only real exception to this. For a long time, we believed the only initial source was going to come from the sun. But in the 80s, we discovered these black smokers down at the very bottom of the ocean. I'll throw a short little video clip kind of behind me of the black smokers. But these are geothermal vents down at the bottom of the ocean, and they're putting up hot water. So that smoke is really mineral-rich water. That minerals are coming up from the hot water, and bacteria down at the sea floor are using the hydrogen sulfide present in the water, and they are undergoing a chemical synthesis, if you will. They're using the heat and the chemicals to produce food. So instead of it being sunlight, they're doing it by a chemical, the heat pushed up from the ocean. So the bacteria come in because of the energy source where they are getting their energy to turn into food for them. Other things come in to eat the bacteria, larger things come in to eat the things that are eating the bacteria. So we get this entire food chain and food web down on the bottom of the ocean. So it's small percentage of life that lives without sunlight, but it does exist, which is pretty interesting, because we think anywhere that we may have a geothermally active planet, the possibility of life existing where those thermal vents, so if we have water and heat on Earth, we find living things. Not everywhere, it's a small percentage, but it does occur. What eats what? We can classify things by what they eat, and most of you are pretty solid on this. Types of consumers. A primary consumer, something that only eats plants. We call that an herbivore, like a cow, a deer, a rabbit. They only eat plants. Then we have carnivores, something like a mountain lion that eats other things, or a lot of times something like a hawk. A hawk eats other animals. Some things maybe only eat insects. So we have all kinds of carnivores, something that eats other animals. Now we also do have omnivores. You and I are good examples of omnivores. We eat both plant and animal to get our nutrition. And lastly, kind of at the bottom end, or at least separately, are decomposers. When you or I or any other animal dies, decomposers take over, and the bacteria and other things begin to break us down. Now we also have detrivores. These are things that are still consumers, but they kind of specialize on eating things that are already dead, detrivores. But they're still just a consumer. Still could just be a carnivore, possibly an omnivore if they'll eat both. But a decomposer is specifically something that is breaking it down back into the nutrients, cycling back into the ecosystem, whatever it may be. So herbivore, carnivore, omnivore. Detrivores exist, but it's still a type of carnivore usually, and then decomposers. This kind of makes up our what's eating what. Now all of this comes down to, at the cellular level, what we call cellular respiration. This is where it's all taking place. An organism obtains energy from the food it eats. This morning I ate my blueberries, pineapple, yogurt, and granola. Chew it down. Now my body has to break that down. I can't just have it as it is. I chew it up, it gets into my stomach, it turns into what we call a chyme, kind of like a smoothie consistency, and then it makes its way into the intestines. When it's in the intestines, now we begin to pull the individual little tiny chains of carbohydrates and proteins out into our bloodstream, and that carries it out to all of our cells. Now the process of breaking down these carbohydrates to yield energy is what we call cellular respiration. This is where the cells are taking that food and turning it into energy so I can move around, so I can speak, so I can run, go for a swim, whatever. This occurs inside the cells of most organisms, but cellular respiration is where we are actually burning or using the fuel. Now, once again, I'm going to throw the kind of formula up here. Cellular respiration is the flip side to the coin of photosynthesis. Cells are absorbing oxygen and they use it to release energy from the food. All combustion events need oxygen, just like if I light gasoline on fire or I light a stick on fire. It's burning, it needs oxygen to burn. Just like in our body, we're burning calories, we require oxygen. So we breathe oxygen in. I eat a sugar molecule. So I have my C6H12O6 that the plant made earlier. Taking a nice deep breath of oxygen, that all goes into my cell. There, my cell, through a process called ATP, adenine triphosphate. Through this process, cellular respiration, we are creating energy. So I am going to produce carbon dioxide and water as waste products, and then I have energy. I breathe out the carbon dioxide. I will either sweat or pee out the excess water from this equation, and I'm left with usable energy. Plants take energy from the sun, water and carbon dioxide, and turn it into sugar and oxygen. We take the sugar and oxygen and in our bodies turn it back into carbon dioxide and water, and the cycle goes on and on and on. Now, part of the energy that's obtained through cellular respiration is simply used to carry out our daily activities. So I eat the food. Well, not all of that food really goes to making me fat or bigger or stronger or growth and development. A lot of it is I'm just using it up, right? I've been the same size for the past 30, 40 years practically. I keep eating food, but I'm not getting any bigger because all of the energy I'm eating is just going to keeping me alive. I'm walking around, I'm moving, I'm talking, all the stuff is using the energy that I'm eating. Now, excess energy gets stored as fat or sugar. Now, initially I can store it in my liver as sugar, and that's what I'm going to go use if I go run around or I literally go out for a run or a bike ride, something of this nature, and I'll store it as sugar. That I don't use up in the course of the day, my body will convert into fat, so I have it for a rainy day. Times when I can't get enough food, then I can go into my fat cells and use that for my long-term energy in a sense. And I love this little thing of a chloroplast versus a mitochondrion. So in the plant, it's the chloroplast using light energy to make glucose, and in you and I, we have the mitochondrions, and they take that sugar and they break it down to turn it into adenine triphosphate, ATP, which is our energy to go on about our day and do whatever it is we're going to do. So we need to talk about energy transfer in this system. Every time an organism eats another organism, so I eat that chicken, or I eat that pineapple, whatever it might be, that energy transformation occurs. And we can trace that energy by looking at food chains, food webs, or tropic levels. So I can follow the energy from the grass into the grasshopper, into the snake, into the bird that eats the snake, and ultimately then into the decomposers that break down the bird when it's all said and done. So first off, let's look at the food chain. Food chain, very simply, just a sequence where energy gets transferred from one organism to the next as each organism eats another organism. It's a fairly simple process. So this is, once again, the grasshopper eats the grass, the bird eats the grasshopper, a larger bird eats that bird, and then maybe you or I catch and eat that bird. It's a pheasant or something. Not that I really hunt that much pheasant, but we get the idea. So looking at this in a very simple, now this is a ocean food chain, but down at the very bottom we have algae, and then krill come in to eat the algae. That picture of the krill is way too big, it'd be really small. And then some broadfish come in to eat the krill, and then a leopard seal may eat the broadfish, and a killer whale is eating the seal. Just a straight up food chain, straight up the line. Nothing wrong with a food chain, except for they are fairly simplistic. Because if we remove any one thing, it looks like everything else would die. But in reality, leopard seals are eating more than just, broadhead fish. They have lots of various things. So, in a food web, there's almost always more than one food chain. Once again, I talked about this thing like I ate chickens. Well, if there aren't any more chickens, Mr. Pettit's gonna die. Well, I can go eat some pork. I can eat corn. I can eat soybeans. I can eat mushrooms. I can eat lots and lots of things. I'm not completely dependent on chickens. And almost nothing out there is completely dependent on only one type of thing. Even whales that are eating plankton, well, there is a whole bunch of types of plankton. Or something eating krill, that's really just a term for really small type shrimp. They're eating any of those type of organisms typically. Food webs are what we tend to look at when we do it that way. Now let's look at that same food chain, but turn it into a food web. So down at the bottom I have plankton, like in the terms of algae, etc. And I can have phytoplankton and I have zooplankton. Phytoplankton are going to be autotrophs or producers getting their energy from the sun. Zooplankton are little teeny tiny microscopic organisms, but they're more animal-like, and the zooplankton are eating the phytoplankton. So krill are eating the phytoplankton, so are zooplankton. Then the fish are eating the krill, but they're also eating some of these zooplankton. And then the squid is eating the fish as well as the zooplankton. The leopard seal is eating the toothfish, it's eating the squid, it's eating the penguin, and then we get the idea. A food web tries to show the actual complexity, where a food chain is just a very simple look and approach to it. Let's talk tropic levels. Tropic levels, this is going to be each step in the transfer of energy. So if we talk about this food chain, it's the energy transfer from the phytoplankton to the zooplankton to the toothfish, all the way up the chain. And each one is known as a tropic level. So the autotrophs form the base of the pyramid or the base of the tropic levels, our first tropic level. And then our herbivores are going to be the next tropic level, and then the carnivores, possibly omnivores, forming the next tropic level. Each one of these steps in a food chain or a food web or a food pyramid are going to have these producers, and then primary consumers, secondary consumer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. So I have a producer at the bottom, first level, primary consumer, herbivore, secondary, which is going to be a carnivore, tertiary could be a carnivore again. It depends on what they're eating, what's eating what. Let's take a look at this in terms of a food pyramid. So the food pyramid back here. Down at the base, this is where energy's coming in from the sun, and I have a lot of grass. I have any pyramid, right? The base of the pyramid is I have more bricks at the bottom of the pyramid than at the very top where I just have one brick, right? So down at the base, we have all these producers. It takes a lot of grass to feed the grasshoppers. It takes a lot of grasshoppers to feed, in this case, the next one up, the birds. And then it takes a lot of birds to feed the tertiary consumer. So we get an energy loss each step up. Have a lot of energy in the grass, but as the grasshoppers eat the grass, a lot of the energy isn't going to making the grasshopper big and fat. It's going to the grasshopper jumping and hopping and chirping and doing whatever grasshoppers do. The birds eat the grasshoppers, and all of the grasshopper energy doesn't go into the bird. A lot of it's just going into the bird being able to fly and go about its daily business. So we have an energy loss in the system. So when we talk about this energy pyramid, each layer of the pyramid equals a tropic level. Producers form the base, and that's where we have the most energy. The most energy in a system is down there at the base. As it gets smaller and smaller, I have less and less energy to go along. So we always have to have fewer organisms at the top of the food chain than we have at the bottom. Once again, it takes a lot of chickens. A lot of chickens have to die to support one Mr. Pettit. There has to be a lot of them for me to go on living. This is just the way a food pyramid is going to work. And the energy loss. Now, the law of conservation of energy, or technically the first law of thermodynamics, states energy can neither be created nor destroyed. We're going to use this term energy loss. It's not like it's truly lost, but it leaves the system typically in the form of heat. Like I go out for a run and I get hot, right? I get hot and sweaty, and that heat goes out into the environment. It's not truly gone. I didn't destroy it. It just gets transferred into heat, and that heat gets lost into the greater system, and it eventually bleeds out into space. So, decreasing amounts of energy at each tropic level. I have less energy here, less energy here, less energy here, and a small amount at the very top. This energy loss affects the number of organisms at each level, and it limits the number of tropic levels we can have in an ecosystem. I have a strong, biodiverse, healthy ecosystem. Well, I can have multiple tropic layers. I get somewhere like a desert, and I can't have as many layers because I don't have as many organisms to support the next tropic level up. We lose about 90% of the energy from one level to the next. So the grasshopper eats the grass. Well, by the time something eats the grasshopper, it's only getting 10% of the energy that the grasshopper ate because the grasshopper is using its energy. That wraps it up today for section 1. Come back, we'll look at section 2 next round. Take care, guys.